All right. And we are recording. So this is, I'm not actually put my like typical YouTube intro video thing on here. I'm just going to have it just jump right into the audio. So those of you that are listening to us, welcome back to the Everyday Dan podcast. Actually, today it's going to be the Barst brothers because I have my best friend Greg here on with me, and also his son, who you might hear on occasion. But if you don't like that, that's tough luck. You can deal with that because babies are awesome. But
Yeah.
so this is also long term, and actually, it is Greg's fault that all of you listen to me already because when we didn't start a podcast together, I just started one anyway, and now, well, look at that. Take that. You were bound to come around sooner or later.
I just need to go to sleep, but
We both know he's not going to go to sleep.
probably not. But that's okay.
That
Continue.
is okay. Yes. Okay. So while you're chilling him down and everything, how about you introduce yourself? And I'm looking at the outline in our notes and everything for the introduction episode. So,
Yeah,
because we technically have a general first one. So, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about where we met and all that.
sure. Well, as Dan said, I'm Greg. I've known Dan for many years at this point, and from Michigan. Kind of met when we both went to school out in Pennsylvania. Um, I mean, where do you want me to go with this? Do you want me to go into my testimony, or do you?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Okay, yeah,
because we could do our testimonies up
sure,
until we meet, and then
sure,
obviously parallel, because then they intersect a whole lot, obviously from there. So
yeah,
after you do up
yeah,
until we meet, then I'll add when we're my testimony, and then we can go from there.
sure. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, born into a Christian family and kind of grew up doing the whole church scene, uh, going to camp in the summers, and probably six or so, I was at a VBS down near my grandparents and made a profession of faith there. From there, just kind of continued to live life and do the whole youth group and Sundays, Wednesdays, fun youth group activities, kind of using it as I mean, it's just something you did. Uh, the old adage of every time the church doors were open, we were there. Well, that was me. Um, Slowly moving through, um, got pulled out of the public school system. I think it was about third grade, just because of some of the things that they were teaching in the educational system that my parents
Mhm.
didn't care for, um, being taught as fact versus theory. So they made the decision to homeschool us. And probably the best thing that could have happened was being homeschooled. Obviously, gave my parents a significant amount of control over what I was being taught and helped shape my worldview, helped prepare me for where we're at today, really.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of went through the whole involved in sports to the extent that when we were growing up, uh, homeschoolers were allowed with the public schools. Did a lot of swimming and really loved it. Really thought I was going to be going, maybe not to the Olympics, but on a professional level. Ended up during that time, we had a missionary come visit our church, and we ended up going down to Recife, Brazil, and I think it was 96. We went down for a 2 week stay. And after that stay, my parents kind of approached us and said, "Hey, we would like to see what you guys think." And we ended up going down and living in Brazil for 2.5 years as short term missionaries. Um, Spectacular time of my life, a huge growing point, a changing point in my life. Um, it was down there that I think I really grabbed a hold of my faith. and made it my own, kind of made it my own decision. Um, after that 2.5 years down there, we moved back, and I came back, and I kind of felt a little bit, I guess, bitter toward what I saw in the United States. Um, just this apathetic view on things and the lack of seriousness within the church. And in some ways, it caused me to be a little bit bitter, but
Mhm.
had some good youth leaders that worked with me through that, helped me realize that being in the US was a huge blessing. Um, while there are challenges to being an American Christian, um, it is a huge blessing in that we have an opportunity for education that not everybody else does, and had some strong influences that started pushing me toward what was then called Baptist Bible College in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. Um, had some friends that were ahead of me a little bit in the college world that came back and visited and encouraged me to come out and apply to do a Bible program. Um, so finished up finished up the job I was at and said, okay, I'm gonna go to college for a short time frame and see what that'll do me as far as a diploma, because I had been interested in the military. Um, that didn't pan out because of my homeschool diploma, which is a foreign concept to most people now. But that's how the Lord orchestrated it so that I did not go into the military before college. Um, but I think it was, let's see, we graduated nine, so 8, 7, 6, what is it, 2005 that we started there freshman year?
2005, 2006. Yeah, that was our first year.
Yeah.
And you weren't in my dorm at the time.
No, we were in separate dorms.
You were in the heathen dorm. I mean, other people might disagree and everything, but you know. But then you
Yeah.
moved in, you got saved, so
Well, so yeah, Dan and I met through some mutual, well, I don't know if they were your friends at that point or not, but
uh,
some mutual uh, guys in his dorm. One of the guys from our church, our pastor's son, was actually in Dan's dorm. And so met Dan through that, and slowly watched this this friendship grow over the next 4 years of college. Eventually, I think it was my sophomore year, I
mhm.
moved into Ridley,
Yep.
and we were on the same floor. And then the fun began.
I
Um,
think I probably spent more time in your room hanging out with you than I did in my own room a lot of the times, honestly.
yeah, that's very likely.
Playing Bejeweled or
Yeah, Bejeweled,
or
or
Modern Warfare.
yeah, that happened.
Yep.
Um, probably a
Yeah.
little more time spent video gaming than we should have, but
We
you
did
get older and
pass.
you learn things.
Yeah, we did survive. We did pass and had semi decent grades.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, listen, I passed and that's enough there, and I'm happy with that. I probably would have gotten better grades if I'd actually focused, but you know,
Sure.
you and
Well,
I both know that focus is not exactly my strong suit. But well, I'll jump in on my part. So I grew up in a very similar setting, except not. My parents grew up down in Pennsylvania, like Allentown area, and then they moved from there into the Poconos area when I was about 6. I gotten saved probably right around then, after hearing the gospel in Awana. So I have a special place in my heart for the Sparkies, you know.
yeah,
I don't even know if they're still around. I think they are.
it could
Um,
be. I remember those.
I think they are. But so yeah, so I got saved there, but I think I kind of coasted at that point until I probably coasted at that point until maybe my early teens, somewhere around there. And then I'd heard a message from my pastor about, getting down and serving. And then I ended up being a child evangelism fellowship summer missionary.
Okay.
And then, so that was kind of doing day camps and 5-day clubs and stuff like that. And CEF is still around,
Oh yeah,
actually.
did a missions trip with them in junior high. Went down to Mississippi.
Dude, yeah, I
Oh,
did not
sorry,
get to
not
do something like
Mississippi,
that.
St. Louis.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't get to do that, but then from there I had run into BBC. But the only thing I knew about it is I thought they were KJV only because we knew somebody at our church that went to BBC and then came back and told our pastor that if we didn't start using only the KJV, we were all like going to hell basically. So I thought that was BBC. But then I went to a college fair. They were right there. They were like an hour from my house or less. Went to talk to them. They were really good. End up doing a tour. And then from there, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to go here. And got stuck in the jock dorm. And I'm not a jock in any way. And I know our listeners that know me will be like, oh, wow. Tried to move out of the dorm. And they're like, no, you're supposed to be in that dorm. And that was the end of it. We
Well, I
met
got
through,
lucky then. I got to move out of my dorm, and you didn't.
they basically told me, no, you're supposed to be there. And so I was there. And then we obviously connected and we met. We survived our graduate, first our years of college. You moved back to Michigan and I stayed in Pennsylvania, did a year of grad school. Um, and then obviously, at that point I met my wife. Senior year, we got engaged during my year of grad school. Then I moved to New York. Um, and we would hang out digitally. I think you came out once or twice. I remember one of the times Natalie was like a newborn because I have a photo of you holding her, and she was probably not like more than 6 months old.
Yeah, I think I might have been out for maybe her first Christmas.
I think so. I'm fairly certain you were actually, yeah. And so that was the last time we saw each other in person. And then from there, we kind of would talk. I think we would talk like every couple months. We'd have like a phone conversation.
Yeah.
And then I went into ministry, and then just about a year or so into ministry, my wife and I just basically say we went off the deep end. Um, and I walked away from God for a time period. But even behind the scenes, you were still like talking. I think you talked with my pastor, you talked with my
Yeah.
wife. You were like heavily involved in and spreading prayer requests all over during that time point. So, and then when my wife and I reconciled and were working on things, I think you and I started talking more regularly at that point.
Yep.
I mean, at this point now, I think, and if you ask my wife, she has said that you and I talk on a more regular basis. We talk more some days than she and I talk, but she's also an introvert, so that can be a relief for her as well. So
Get
that's
some of
kind of
your word count out before you get home.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, so that was kind of like that crux point, that period of time was probably what God used to kind of like put strengthen and kind of reconnect us on a much better basis, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at this point now, aside from like various points, like, when your son was born, that's kind of a point when you're not going to talk as much because, you're kind of occupied.
Yeah.
I think we talk or text like every day now.
Pretty close. I mean, there might be a short stretch where we don't, but yeah, I'd say that it's pretty accurate.
Yep. I mean, it is to the point too where like, and obviously this is getting recorded now, but it's going to get posted Monday. So, I'm going to be taking part in a ceremony that's coming up.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces of advice that I'm providing is basically like, as a guy for godly masculinity, you need to have at least one good, like a guy best friend. And it takes work, obviously, to keep those friendships, but like
Well, yeah. I mean, for the fact that we're what, is it a 9 hour drive, 10 hour drive apart,
at least that.
and just the fact that we're still connected in the way that we are,
Hmm.
uh, just it takes a level of intentionality
Yep.
um, that outside of a spouse, I mean, you can't maintain a friendship
Hmm.
unless you have a level of intentionality that is, for lack of a better word, a God-given
Hmm.
intentionality. I mean, You think about David and Jonathan and everything they
Yep.
went through, but yet they were still friends until the very end.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the big thing. And so that's the thing is you need to have like at least one David and Jonathan friendship in your life because I feel like that's an iron sharpening iron, the whetstone, we're
Mm-hmm.
both like outdoors guys. So, knives and sharpeners and everything. You got to have at least one. So that's the thing is having a friendship like that. So that's where we are, kind of bringing us up to semi speed. And then what was it? It's like 2 years now, I think, at least. You're like sent me a podcast called the Hard Man Podcast.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You're like, hey, you should listen to this.
yeah.
And then they came up with the
Let's
King's.
begin the journey.
Yeah, that started the whole thing. And then it was the King's Hall podcast and
Yep.
Haunted Cosmos. And then, well, this is then jumping in where you came in and why you were sending those things. So I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I got married just over 5 years ago. It was 5 years in June,
Look at all
and
that gray hair, though.
shut it. Um, there's less right now because I shaved it off.
Well, you still have more
um,
than I do.
yeah, that's fair. I have more hair than you. Um,
That's 100% fact. I'm
but
not super ashamed to say that, but maybe a little bummed.
yeah, so 5 years ago we got married, and then obviously we had this little guy here this year,
And
and
I've and obviously you guys cannot see it because I'm not going to put his newborn on a line,
oh
but
yeah,
he's
that's fair.
the most adorable, aside from my daughter when she was a newborn, but he's a super adorable kid. Just saying.
That's fair. So yeah, just kind of the whole getting into marriage and kind of looking for these routes and avenues of um, how do you be a better. Initially, it was just better husband,
Mhm.
um, and I had actually my boss. He also listens to a lot of the same podcasts, a lot of the same pastors and authors that we're listening to now. He listens to those as well. So I think he may have been the one that introduced me to those podcasts. Um, and then I mean, they were just talking about all those things that just resonated with my soul. How I was looking around and going, okay, why is it that we are seeing all of these men walking away from Christianity or not being the husbands or fathers that God has called us to be? Um,
Mhm.
and a lot of it is because of, well, I think a lot of people call it like squishy or soft Christianity. Um, and it's a lack of being challenged as husbands, as men, by brothers in Christ. Um, but through listening to all this, sharing it with you, we started going back and forth and questioning a lot of things that we just kind of took for granted through uh, a lifetime of being told um, this is the way it is. And I mean, not knowing any better because we trust those who are our teachers, our pastors. Um, so we just kind of took it for granted that this is the truth. In college, we kind of saw some people that may have questioned some of that stuff and were, for lack of a better term, shot down by professors. And we're like, oh, okay, that must be heretical. So I didn't pursue any of it. And then I start listening to the Hard Man and King's Hall, listening to these guys talk, and then hearing where their heart and their passion is, and their desire to be a man that seeks after God in everything they do and every aspect of what they do. And then listening to where they were coming from, and I'm like, oh, this is not even a traditional thought process within the churches that we grew up in. We kind of just started down this path, and I can say 100% that it has made me a better husband and a better dad for where I'm at. Um, to see what God is doing in using a church tradition, so to speak, that has been
Mm.
around for a very long time, as opposed to a church tradition that is relatively new. I don't know if we want to throw the names around, but at this point, I don't think it's relevant.
Not yet, but I think we'll start picking on those at some point in
Sure,
the future.
for sure. So, I mean, just going through these podcasts, just hearing these guys talk, uh, it's been a huge difference.
Yes. Yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that. Um, and I think at first, when you first started sending me the podcast, I was trying to keep up, and obviously I didn't always have time.
Yeah,
But then my job has taken me on the road a lot more. And then the more I've been on the road, it's more time to listen to them.
yeah,
And then, we stumbled on Canon Plus
yep.
and all those things. And I mean, that's a treasure trove that's worth every penny still.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and I know some people would probably obviously say that they disagree with some of the theology of Moscow, Idaho, that in that group and everything. And I understand. I'm going to respect that.
Yeah,
But there's a
there's
ton,
nothing
a
wrong with that.
wealth of good material, like books like It's Good to Be a Man was one that I listened to through there, or
Yep.
like Masculine Christianity,
Yeah.
um, or like No Mere Mortals, Marriage for People Who
Oh,
Last Forever. And I know you've bought at least one for a couple that you knew, and I recommended a couple I know buy that book, and I'll probably
yeah.
eventually buy it myself to reread
Oh,
because it's
absolutely.
probably one
I
of the
think I'm
best.
on my third listen through.
I think so. It's one of the best marriage books, but like these are good things, and I think that we've had the opportunity with all the content that we go through to do iron sharpening iron
Oh, yeah.
and really like pick on it because I know that you're texting me, you're like, "Hey, dude, did you listen to that?" And I'm like, "Oh, I've gotten there yet," and then I'm back and forth. I mean, dozens of conversations about theology and where we're at
Yeah.
in leadership and stuff like that. That has really been awesome. And I mean, I know I've I have numerous books on my Kindle and on my bookshelf that are from Canon or books that you had
Mhm.
read, you recommended. So it's your fault I've spent money on these books.
Don't tell your wife.
Of course, I'm gonna tell her. She also listened to this podcast too, so she's gonna hear this also. So
Ah,
she's gonna
sorry,
hear you
Becky.
said that. I'm not gonna bleep that out either. She'll be the one saying, "Greg, why did you do that?" No, um, gotta be wise with finances, but I'd rather spend money on books than I would most other things or coffee. I
Sure.
do still like my coffee. We differ there, and that's okay. Totally understandable and somewhat acceptable.
Sorry. Can't stand the dirt water.
Hey, at least half of your family likes it, so you are redeemed under the covenant of marriage.
I'm the abnormality in my family.
Well, maybe one day. I swore that maybe when you became a dad that you'd become a coffee addict, but
So far, not yet.
not yet. But yeah, I mean that's where we're at now. And then we had talked about doing a podcast at
Mm,
some point or another, and you're like, I don't know. And then me with my ADHD brain decided to go into it anyway for the creative output and do it.
yep.
And then you got to listen in, and then you saw it was like, oh, it's actually not as difficult. I mean, is that probably a pretty good way of putting it that you got a chance to see that it wasn't as
Yeah, I would say that's the
problematic?
truth. I mean, it's obviously newborn is difficult to work around.
True.
I, I think we've been trying to connect and get this recorded, at least an intro for a couple months
Ages.
now.
Yep.
But
And so
yeah,
either, yeah. So either this becomes, so I either we're regular, this is a regular thing on the current podcast, or we spin it out and it becomes its own thing. But like, I guess the segments where it's the two of us, it's the Barst brothers, which then brings to the origin of that name as as well. So the question is, do you want to explain your perspective on when you heard it, or you want me to introduce it?
well, I guess it doesn't matter. I, I don't even remember the first time you used the term. I just remember that it became such a staple within your diet of verbiage. I don't remember what was going on, but something would happen and you'd go, Barst! And then it just kept going. And then eventually both suites of guys that we were
Mhm.
involved in or hanging out with, we all started saying it at some point or another.
Yep.
Um, I don't remember if that was the standard greeting or something else was the standard greeting. That, I mean, if it was being video, I obviously couldn't show it at all, but um, the woo.
Oh yeah, I remember that too. Um, well, that's the thing, and I mean, for me, honestly, came because I knew there was a friend of mine in high school that used it, and I just thought it was a fun word, and then I
Okay,
just picked it up. Has no meaning. It's a made up word, so it's basically a filler word. It
absolutely.
was obviously filled in oftentimes at time points where it was substitutionary for a particular set of verbiage. I don't necessarily mean it now,
Yeah.
although
Now
more
it's
often,
standard greeting of "Hey, what's up?"
yeah, like I know if I leave you a voice, if I call you and it goes to voicemail, it's just going to be me yelling Barst and vice versa.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or you pick up and you say that too.
Oh
But
yeah,
when your
absolutely.
son eventually says it for the first time, like, yes, I've succeeded. Oh man, look, he's
You'll have succeeded in corrupting another generation.
absolutely. Look at that. Either we were really boring and he just slept through us, or maybe it's getting interesting, so now he's woken up. So either way, um, but yeah. So now I'm gonna pull out my list of questions because I figured we could cover at least one thing for this thing.
Oh sure.
All right, this is gonna be a fun one because obviously you and I are, well, we are pro amendments of all the different kinds. So here's the question. And also too, because I do not have Zoom Pro, we have 10 minutes, so that works out. With 10 minutes left. All right. What are your views on self-defense? Since Jesus said to turn the other cheek, if you think self-defense is right, what Bible verses do you have to back it up?
Oh geez, you didn't even give me time to grab some of those verses.
No,
Um,
man, I told you I had one, and I actually have not looked up these verses yet either because I've been sitting on these questions. So I'm like, I'm just gonna we're gonna do off the
we're just gonna
cuff.
wing it. Okay.
We're gonna wing it.
Um, well, I would say self-defense is permissible, even up to the point of finishing your opponent. Um,
Mhm.
to use the Mortal Kombat term,
Finish
finish him.
him.
Um, but just the passage that comes to mind right now is when they're coming to arrest Jesus in the garden,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
Peter pulls out his sword and chops off an ear. Um, and to hear that, excuse you,
Oh,
I mean, they were obviously carrying swords in what was a civilized area.
mm,
So, what would be the point in carrying a sword around except for self defense?
right.
Um, I don't think that we're called just to lose our life because we can't defend ourselves. If that
Mhm.
was the case, Christians would be long gone.
Yep.
Um, but I mean, I would say there's certain circumstances that might be worth considering.
Mhm.
Like there are probably times where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to take the risk versus I'm not going to take the risk. Something you need to consider as a single guy um, is not something you have to consider as a married man, or
Mhm.
a married man has to consider different factors
Yep.
than a single guy, because as a husband and a father, you are
Mhm.
called to provide and protect for your family. Um,
Yes.
and I would
Even
say
going so, I was gonna say, even going so far as to lay down your life for your family too.
absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, if in the defense of my wife and son, I lose my life, well, I'm doing what God commanded me to do and
Right.
providing and protecting for them to my utmost. We're
Yeah, I
called
would.
as men to sacrifice ourselves, not only in the self defense portion, but we're called to
Mm,
sacrifice ourselves for our wives.
right.
That is part of what Christ did when he laid down his life for the church.
Mhm.
And as he is our head, we are under him, and he calls us to follow his example for
Mhm.
those under our care.
Yes.
So yeah, self-defense is absolutely permissible, even up to finishing someone.
And if I remember, I think it's Luke 22. I'd have to double check, but Jesus like tells his disciples, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one.
Hmm.
So why would you do that if that's not the need for self-defense is not there?
Yeah,
And there's a couple other ones, so we could probably go really far down that rabbit hole. But I thought that'd be like a pretty solid question. But I think that was I would agree with you on that one. So, and we've finally done it. We've recorded our first episode. So this is like
yeah.
pulling the Band-Aid off. We've made it through. Now we have to do the next one, obviously, too. So,
Well, maybe we can have a little more planning so I can have some verses ready. But anyway,
well, yeah, okay. So the next question, I have a list. I'll have to send you the next question because the next
sure.
one's going to be a good one. It has to
Okay.
do with female pastors.
Ooh, fun.
So we're going to have to talk about that one. But I think it's good. This is a good time to us to wrap up. I think we got like 5 minutes left on the recording time anyway.
Yeah,
But Greg, thank you for joining me and
yeah,
on our
absolutely.
inaugural episode of the Barst Brothers. So I'm going to let you go, man.
All
And
right.
I'm sure I'm going to talk to you tomorrow. So,
Wow.
all right.
All
I'll catch
right.
you later, man.
All right.
Peace.
Bye.
Barst!